Hi there everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to another video. So in today's video, I'm going to be taking you through my Ableton session that I created for the purposes of this course. So inside of this session, I've created a pop track that's influenced or inspired by artists like The Weeknd and Charlie Puth. So the reason I've decided to go with a pop track for this course is because I think pop as a genre really covers a vast amount of production techniques that I'd like to go through with you. And so with that being said, I'm going to take you through the session structure of my track. And whilst I'm doing that, I want you guys to start thinking about what your session would look like in relation to your inspiration track. So let's get into it. All right, guys, so we are now inside of my Ableton session that I created for the purposes of this course. So this is my pop track. You can see here that there are a whole bunch of elements that make up this track, and there are a few different sections also inside of this track. All right, so I'm just going to give it a little play for you guys so that you can hear all the elements working together. So let me just play the chorus. Go, let it go. So we've got some bass in there, we've got some guitars, some vocals, we've got a few synth sounds. So we've got a whole bunch of elements making up this track. So before I get into the elements, I'm just going to run you through the different sections that make up this track. So as you can see here, we've got some markers at the top of this session that locate the different sections of the track. So we've got an intro, a verse, chorus, second verse, a bridge, a second chorus, and an outro. So I like to use these locators because they really just help me navigate through my session. So if I really want to get to my second verse quickly, I know exactly where to go, and I can just click on it and hit play, go, and I'm at my second verse. So I'm just going to show you guys how you would put your own locators down in your own session. So what you would do is you would click on a section of your session that you want to add a locator to. So let's say I want to add one over here. I just click on that section and I would say create, and I would say add locator, and you can see there that a locator has popped up. And I can name that locator and hit enter, and there we go, there's my locator. So I'm just gonna delete that one because obviously I've got all of my locators already, but that's how you would add one in. All right, so those are the sections of our track. Now I'm gonna run you through the elements that make up our track. So these are all of our elements here. We start off with some drum elements, which I've put in a drums group here, which you can open and close like that. And our drums are made up of a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat. Then we've got a crash, which would kind of fall into a percussion section. Then we've got two bass tracks over here, one just for the chorus. So as you can see, it just comes in during our choruses. And then we've got another bass that kind of runs throughout most of the track. Then we've got a whole bunch of keys and synths inside of this track. So we've got some chords here, we've got a pad, which is kind of like an ambient ongoing synth that just fills space and kind of runs through the whole track. Then we've got an ARP synth, so ARP stands for arpeggio. This is just a really helpful tool to kind of keep the track moving. That arpeggio is just a very dynamic kind of sound, so it's great for pop. Then we've got a keys melody, which is similar to our one bass, also just comes in during our choruses. Next up, we've got some live recorded guitars. And then we've got another group here that I've called Vox Group. And this just consists of a bunch of vocals that I've recorded for the track. So for this track, I pretty much recorded 4 vocals that are very, very similar, and I layered them because this is quite a common technique used in pop, but I will run through that in more detail when we get to the vocal recording section of the course. Yes, so those are the different elements that make up my track. This is what they would look like in arrangement view. If I change to session view, you would see all of the tracks over here at the top, and these are just the channels for each of those tracks. So if I were to hit play, you can see all of those tracks coming through, all the signals from each of the tracks. Okay, so that's kind of a brief overview of my session. And I hope that starts giving you guys some ideas of how your sessions are going to look. So when I structure my sessions, I kind of like to use a logic of frequencies. So the first tracks in my session will generally be the tracks that take up the lower range of my track. And then I move into the mid range of my track, and then I move into the higher range of my track. So as you would know, drums and bass are much lower frequency elements and instruments. So I start off with my drums and bass. Then I move into my keys and guitars, which are kind of mid-range. They take up your mid-range frequencies. So those kind of sit in the middle of my session. And then my vocals, which take up the higher end of the frequency spectrum, sit at the end. So I've kind of ordered them in that way. I'm going from low to high. So when you're structuring your session, you can definitely use the frequency range to kind of order your tracks. I find that always helps me. That's how I learned to structure my sessions, because it's just a very logical approach. So now that I've shown you my session, I want you guys to start building your sessions based off of the session that I've shown you today, but also remembering to keep your inspiration track in mind. So obviously I've made a pop track, but your inspiration track is not necessarily a pop track. So you might have different elements taking up your track. You might not have as many synths, for example. You might have more live elements. It all just depends on the inspiration track that you've chosen. But this is a really great structure to start off of. So I would like you guys to use this as a template when you are building your track. Okay, so I've actually just opened up a completely new Ableton session. As you can see, we've only got 4 tracks here to begin with. So I'm going to build my session or start my session in here. I'm not going to save this version because I've obviously already built my session and added all of my elements, but this is just to show you how I started my session. So I'm going to quickly switch over to arrangement view. And we can see here we've got 2 MIDI tracks and we've got 2 audio tracks. If we were in session view, it would be the same. We've got those same 2 MIDI tracks and those 2 audio tracks. Okay, so I'm just going to start by setting the BPM of my session. So depending on your inspiration track, you're going to have a specific BPM. So when you did your track analysis, that is something that you should take note of. So is it a slower song? Is it a faster song? So because I made a pop track for my session, I have quite a fast BPM. So my session, I believe, is running at 160 beats per minute. So I'm going to quickly change that to 160. Okay, so that's our BPM. We've set it to 160 for me, but like I said, it's dependent on your inspiration track. And now we're going to start putting together all the tracks that make up our song. So we've got these 2 MIDI tracks here, which I will start off with. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this track with 2 fingers so I get my drop down menu. It could be a right click for you if you're using a mouse. And we are going to say group tracks. So now this is for our drum group. So I'm going to get our drop down menu going again, and I'm going to rename this group to drum group, just like so, or drums group. Okay, and now we've got 1 MIDI track inside of our drums group, and I want to add 2 more because our drums are going to consist of a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat. Okay, so what we're going to say is create, and we're going to say insert MIDI track, and we're going to do that one more time. There we go. So now we've got our 3 tracks inside of our drum group, and we're going to quickly rename all of those. So this will be our kick, this will be our snare, and this will be our hi-hat. Okay, so there we go. We've got our drum group going. Next up, we want to have a percussion track. So this could be a MIDI or an audio track. For now, I'm just going to leave it as a MIDI track, and we can change it later if need be. So I'm just going to call this perc for percussion. Then next up, we are going to make our bass tracks. So your bass will depend on whether you want to record it live or use MIDI. So for the basses in my pop track, I used MIDI, but you're welcome to use live. So if you're using a live bass, then you're welcome to use one of these audio tracks. but because I used a MIDI bass, I'm going to just add another MIDI track. So I'm going to say insert MIDI track over here, and there it is. I'm just going to drag it up so it's underneath my perk. I'm going to rename that to bass. So I had 2 basses in my song, but if you're happy with just one, you're welcome to leave it as 1. So we'll just leave it as 1 for now. Then next up, we've got keys. So my keys were also programmed through MIDI. So I'm going to say create MIDI track again, and we're going to rename this to keys. So I think good rule of thumb is to start off with 2 keys tracks. So I'm just going to create another keys track. So I'll name them keys 1 and keys 2. So that'll be keys 2, and this will be keys 1. Then next up, we're going to make 2 synth tracks, which will also be MIDI. So we're just going to create 2 more MIDI tracks. There we go. Rename that to synth 1. So one of those synths could be like a pad, and the other one could be an arpeggio synth, for example. And we got synth 2. Oh, my keys ended up down there, so I'm just going to drag those up. And now we've got 2 audio tracks remaining. So I'm going to name one of these guitars, because generally you record your guitars live. You can get some MIDI guitar sounds, but I just prefer a live guitar sound. So we'll name that guitars, and we can also use guitar samples in this audio track here if you guys maybe don't have the means to record a live guitar. And next up, we've got vocals. So we're just going to go rename that to Vox. Okay, and I'm also going to make this vocal track into a group. So we'll just get our drop down menu going again, and we'll say group tracks. So let me rename this group to Vox group. I'm just going to leave this as a single track for now, because it's very dependent on how many vocal tracks that you'd like to record. Okay, and then if we want to add backing vocals into this session, my session doesn't have, but if you'd like to, you're welcome to. So we can go create. Now we're going to create an audio track, because obviously vocals are recorded live. Oh, I see we've created our track in our group there. So I'm just going to delete that audio track, and I'm going to just click out of that group, and we'll go create audio track, and we'll drag it down to the bottom, and we'll rename this to BVs. That stands for backing vocals. Okay, so there we go. So that's kind of just what I want you guys to start off with, just kind of like a base session with all of your tracks pre-made. We've got a bunch of MIDI tracks, and we've got some audio tracks. And then now we just start building our elements into all of these tracks now that they're there. So cool. I hope that's helpful, and enjoy building your sessions, guys.